So should you buy in late 2025 in hopes of getting a better deal, or wait until 2026 and get more selection? We get a lot of questions about the market. I'll address what the market looks like and how it will likely trend out in the early part of 2026. I'll tell you a few ways to get a good deal if you do want to move now rather than wait, and some of the pros and cons of waiting. Hi, my name's Charlie Vinci. I've helped hundreds of families relocate here over the last decade. Let's jump right into it. All right, let's talk about the pros and cons of buying in late 2025 versus 2026. So the big bonus of buying in late 2025 is you could get a better deal. But if you wait until 2026, you'll get better selection. So it's a bit of a trade-off. Let me give you the pieces and the parts, and you can decide what is the best fit for you. In late 2025, what you're going to find is very low inventory. However, you're also going to find more motivated sellers. In other words, the pool of inventory that's still on are a group of sellers who would really prefer to sell now if they can. Sometimes that means more flexibility on their part. The other thing that you'll find is there's less buyer demand. Once we hit Thanksgiving or pretty close to Thanksgiving, people sort of go dormant. They don't see as many houses listed, and they have a lot of family things to take care of. And so the focus shifts and you get less buyer demand, which means it's an easier time as a buyer to purchase a home. So this is a real pro, especially if you have some concerns about going into a really intense spring, which I'm sure it will be. This time of year is just a little bit easier to buy. Sometimes you can negotiate a little bit more, and that's a real pro. It's a way to get a better deal on a house than perhaps you would in the spring. So most people think new listings are the way to get a great deal, but I think most of the good new listings that you're going to see this year are going to come on at very competitive prices. Why? Because they need to move those houses fairly quickly, or we're going to fall into the cold season and the house is going to stay on the market. And so this is a tactic in order to get a home sold this time of year. And quite frankly, that lower price is going to pull all the buyers out of the woodwork that may be a little dormant. They're going to come, and there's going to be enough buyers to have a multiple offer situation and push that price up. Also remember that the seller's a bit optimistic. When you first put a home on the market, you really want to hold out and see if you can get your price, right? So new listings, generally not where I'm seeing my buyers get good deals. If you're finding this valuable, subscribing is the best way to get the local insights that I share every week. Another way buyers believe that they are going to get a good deal is off markets. Now, I'm not going to say that there can't be an opportunity in an off market. There can, but I think the percentage of off markets relative to the on market property is relatively low. And when you consider that this time of year, most people are putting their properties as off-market listings to see if they can sell ahead of time and avoid the spring market altogether. But in the back of their head, they're thinking, well, if I don't get the price I want, I can just list in the spring. And so that generally isn't conducive to getting a good deal. Again, I'm not going to say there aren't any good deals, but you have a very small percentage of off markets and then a very small percentage of really motivated buyers in that bucket. So the likelihood is not really there. I'm going to tell you where to look, however. This time of year, especially, you want to be looking for the back on markets. These are the homes that were probably a fairly good deal to begin with, got a bunch of offers, went under contract perhaps, and then are coming back to market now. And what happens when that house comes back to market is it sees less buyer demand. When you couple that with this slower period of the year, that's a really great opportunity. In other words, you're walking into something with very little demand. It does not mean that the property's not a good value. We're going to determine that. We're not going to allow the fact that it's come back on market and it doesn't have the same level of interest determine the value of the house. We're going to actually look at fact and determine the value of the house. This is how you determine whether you're really getting a good value rather than the hype that can be created around a listing, which makes the buyer think it's a good value. These are two very different things, and I find that buyers are often confused or misled by activity and thinking that that means that house is a great deal. Another thing to be looking out for this time of year is reduced prices. Again, this is one of those cases where buyers often look at a home, see the price drop, and it doesn't move right away, and they think, oh, that must not be the price. You know what? Unfortunately, the reality is the overwhelming demand comes when a house is first listed. When we drop prices later on, and especially in the block of time that we're talking about, call it mid-November through the end of December, with less demand, unfortunately, those price drops fall on deaf ears. And oftentimes those price drops put those properties in very competitive pricing range where they're a fair value. We've often gotten really good prices, as much as maybe $100,000 under what we think they're worth during this particular season, and you avoid the price increases that will likely come in the spring. So it's kind of a two wins, so to speak. Okay, so what about next year? Because this really needs to be part of your plan as well. It's great to say that you could potentially get a good deal from the middle of November to the end of December. However, we know that there's not a lot of selection. So what if something doesn't become available during this period? Or what if you're really just the type of person who would prefer to pick from more properties, and you understand that you'll probably pay a little bit more for that convenience, but you may also get a home closer to what your dream is, what your ideal is. At some point in January, our market's gonna flip back. I say some point because weather has a big factor. But oftentimes, if there's no snow on the ground and it's not terribly cold, roughly the first week or so, maybe 2 weeks into January, we see a significant uptick in buyer demand. The reality is the houses don't come back that fast. So the buyers come before the homes, and it essentially builds up a pent-up demand in the market leading right into the spring. So what you're going to notice is, if you were to shop in, say, middle of November to end of December period, and you roll over into January, all of a sudden it's like things just exploded. The same houses that you saw in December, which didn't sell, are selling immediately, and then all of a sudden these other houses are coming on, and you're seeing, packed open houses and hard to get showings. Things shift really quickly. I know a lot of people think it's the spring market, but the spring market for us really starts in early January. It just continues to build until May. Another thing to consider, if you're out there and you want a balance between value and selection, if you're looking for this sort of middle ground, hey Charlie, I want a good deal, but I also want selection, that probably happens in the earlier part of the year. Essentially, the sales from January, when they close, let's call it sometime in March. Now, when a house gets listed in March, they're using those comparable sales. Prices increase, right? So they build on those. Then someone pays over asking for that house, and then that a couple months later, that sale is being used to price the next house, and then someone pays a little over ask there. This is how it builds up over the spring. In my experience, by the time you get to the end of the spring, you've seen the overwhelming majority of appreciation. This could be 10 or 15%. This is typically what we've seen the last few years of appreciation from January until June. Offers accepted. Now remember, those June offers don't close till 2 months later, August, so we have to think a little differently. But offers that are accepted between January and June, that window is where the overwhelming price increases happen for the year. And for the remainder of the year, let's call it summer through winter, it's more of a stabilization. You might have a little down or a little up, but it's really hard to see, and you almost need the data looking backwards to find out whether you went up or down in the fall. But know that the majority of price increases stack. So if you want to get the best deal with the most selection, you're probably shooting for the early part of 2026. So what are your next steps? Well, the first most obvious thing is, if you really want to get moving, either the end of 2025 or even 2026, you already should be talking to a realtor. So call me or call whomever you plan to work with and get those pieces in place. Next, go over to my website, bookmark the buyer guides for the towns that you're interested in, and you'll find a treasure trove of information there, from maps to town information that will help you make a really good choice. We hope you found this valuable and it helps you with your search.